Hello and welcome back. I'm Brian Rios and I'm joined today by Joshua Grant.
Hello.
And Brittany Arthur,
Hi.
the CEO of DTJ. Thank you so much for being here, Brittany.
Thank you for having us.
And can you give us a little bit about your business, what you do, and kind of the ethos behind it?
Absolutely. So at Design Thinking Japan, which we are now rebranded as DTJ, we build two things. We build AI literacy and we also build AI systems and solutions. So that just basically means software.
I was very specifically interested in having you here because I think like a few weeks ago, I was going down kind of I'm like a 90s, 2000s kid, and I was looking at all these like Y2K videos, and like everything was so futuristic, MP3 players, we were gonna have flying cars, all of that, and there seemed to be such a big excitement around like the future of the internet. And I think what has happened over the last several months, especially with the arrival of things like ChatGPT, there was a real big excitement around AI and what this could mean for society, for the future, for the workforce at large. And I think now, over the last few months, we've started to see some sort of structural shifts, workforce shifts that have happened, both positive and negative, around the arrival of AI. And so I think there's a lot of information now out there. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you here is to kind of have a conversation about what's real, what is all exaggerated, on both sides. Like, is AI really actually going to change the world for everyone? Or is it this doom and gloom thing that we should be concerned about? And like, how can we sort of talk about it more practically and like in real terms and not this sort of euphemistic language that I think gets lost in a lot of the internet conversation? So I guess the first thing I would want to ask specifically is, obviously we have a lot of conversation around AI in the US and Europe, et cetera, but what is the conversation in Japan? Like, where is Japan in this process at the moment?
This is a great question. So thank you so much for having me, Joshua and Brian. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I'm really glad that we've decided to take a practical approach to talking about AI, because AI affects everybody. So in order to kind of visualize and like, let's go on a journey and think, what does this really mean? I want you to think that AI is electricity. AI is electricity, which means that AI is not an app. AI is not, a website. In fact, it's infrastructure in your life, right? And I think the opportunity for people, especially if you're, in the workforce and you're looking for jobs, or you're looking to stand out, you want to get noticed, you want to get promoted, you want to win the contract. I think this is when, if you can be more masterful and you can have more intention and you can architect attention and intention around your AI, you're going to win, right? And so what does this really mean? This means your competitive advantage in the workforce for a very long time was like, who can get it done quicker? Who's quicker? Who can execute quicker? Now, when the answer is everyone can execute at an incredible speed now, that means that's no longer your advantage. So instead of, if the answer is AI, which basically it is, the question becomes more important. So you as a professional have the opportunity now to stand out and to really rebrand yourself as someone that can say, I can make an informed decision around not how it should be built or if it can be built, but what do we want to build? Yeah. Why do we want to build it? And I think there's this element of, you mentioned urgency around just kind of what people are feeling. For me, this is a fundamental kind of like, think about almost like quicksand under your feet. This is an element, what I believe to be just a lack of fundamental literacy around AI. But the great thing is about that is that it's very teachable. AI is something very much that you can learn. And to think about how important it is to learn, I want you to think back to like the 90s. I mean, we weren't quite in the workforce yet. But there were certainly people who said, I don't need a computer, I'm in advertising. We do, we're on the whiteboards, we're in the print shops, or I'm in HR. What do I need a computer for? Now, there were people who then said, oh my gosh, this can fundamentally be my vehicle to be something else, a computer. And then there was the internet. And then we can all see that the people that got on, or that commanded the infrastructure, learned the infrastructure, then fundamentally had different developments in their career. And this is then the same thing. And so what we're seeing here in Japan is, because we missed software completely as a nation, we have the opportunity to actually leapfrog software and go straight to AI. right? So this is also an opportunity, but it's not without its challenges. So where we are in Japan at the moment is certainly around enthusiasm, but what I am particularly advocating for is that this enthusiasm doesn't become exhaustion, because the bridge between enthusiasm and like exhaustion is basically like, literacy. You have to learn how to use AI for your own context. So I think just to kind of like start there, I think that's really important for people to understand AI is infrastructure, and the way that I use electricity or you use electricity or whatever is different. It's going to be the same with AI. So that's why, I often see people do things like, oh, I've got a great prompt. And I'm like, that's like me telling you, this is what you should buy your wife or your husband for a birthday. I'm like, you don't even know my wife or my husband. Like, it's that kind of thing. So I'm really an advocate of each person developing their own level of minimum viable literacy around AI, so that they can then command, honestly, their career and their business.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I think, as people who watch this podcast know, I work for a very traditional Japanese company. The conversation around AI within the company is very much like, we are adopting AI, we have an AI initiative, we are going to be an AI company. And you're like, yeah, but what does that mean for, to your point, what does that mean for HR? What does that mean, obviously, for marketing teams? I think there is this adoption of it, but I think a lot of times, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, a lot of times where that exhaustion comes from is that there isn't an explanation on the why. It's always structured in like, we just need to be more efficient. We just need to be more productive. And so the benefit seems more a corporate benefit as opposed to a personal benefit oftentimes in the discussion, which is also kind of why you see a little bit of fear, because people go, okay, well, is my job, does that mean if I'm not efficient enough, then my job is now gone? So how do you, I definitely agree with Japan being more enthusiastic, but like from that perspective of that exhaustion, I think it's important, and would love to know your thoughts, like how do you take it from that fear of efficiency, productivity, the speed, the computer, for example, is now here. What does that mean for me, and how do I make that work so that, my job is not on the chopping block, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a couple of things we can look at there. The way that we approach AI is not job loss, but task loss. And like, thank goodness. Yeah. Thank goodness that I don't have to do all these other tasks. Like, see you later, bye, right? Yeah. So that's one thing. So I want you to think of AI not as a complete job loss, but rather task reallocation, so that you can then go and do more important things. However, I think one conversation that we're completely missing around AI is the fundamental bigger vision. Like you mentioned, Joshua, like how can someone get behind this kind of technology? You need to see this, you need to have a compelling vision of the future. Now, this is where Japanese companies from previous generations, I'm not talking post-bubble. Post-bubble, we've seen lackluster leadership, apart from like Mikitani-san from Rakuten, or maybe Yanai-san from Uniqlo, but everybody else, no one's like really inspired a nation, apart from those two to an extent. But go before that. Go before when we saw Honda. You have people still alive who worked with Honda, who I was recently at an event, and there was an older man, 80 years old, and he had a tear in his eye talking about how much he loved Honda-san, right? So if there's one thing, and I think that this is an opportunity for Japan, is that because there's this deep trust, there's a deep trust, there's a deep connection, a yearning for that deeper, bigger vision. I think this is an opportunity for a leader that if you're in 2026 and you're looking at your company, this is the time that you say, forget about if we use a spreadsheet, do we just make our spreadsheet more powerful? Go back and think, where do we want to go? Who do we want to be as a business, and how do we get there? Because if you are just adding motors to your spreadsheets, I mean, it's like putting a motor on a horse. Just make a car, right? Doesn't make any sense. So I think it's an opportunity for Japanese leadership to look not forward but back. Things like even, like the Iwakura mission, which is when half of the Japanese government got on a boat for 2 years, circled the world and studied. They went to the US and they studied not only technology, but they studied systems, social systems. How does education work? How does hospitals work? And they came back to Japan, and what did they do? They implemented it in a way that was like Japanese-esque. And Japan had the most successful, prosperous time in a long time. And I think that is the calling right now. If Japanese, and we're seeing this to an extent, in politics, that if Japanese leaders can can paint a compelling view for the future, that's where I really think we can get people behind the technology. If we do not do this, Japan is at risk of being a third world country.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that, because I think that there's always this, we were talking about this when we were having a discussion about doing this, about that they miss the whole software era.
Yep.
Why do you think that why do you think that happened? And then how do we prevent that from happening with the AI era? Because I imagine, again, Japan was probably quite enthusiastic around the internet and the bubble and all these sort of, the rise of Amazon and Google and all these sorts of things. And there's rumors that, there were a lot of these tech companies came to Japan initially to get investment, and Japan was like, I don't know about this. I don't know what your Google will be. So why do you think that software gap happened, and then how do we prevent that from happening from an AI perspective for Japan?
So it's a great question as to why it happened around software. There's many different kind of schools of thought. One popular school of thought is software is more of a craft. There's no particular right or wrong answer. I can make a website or I can build something and it can, look 100 different ways. Right. So the fact that there's no right or wrong was the Japanese didn't really don't love that, right? There was something about it, which is why UX and US don't love it. That's why they love, for example, AI, for example, or machines more. Now, this is then the interesting opportunity for Japan. Okay, the same way that we've seen in many parts of Southeast Asia or even many countries in Africa, they did not do dial-up. I mean, I know the three of us probably had the experience of downloading 3 songs, going to bed, waking up in the morning, do my songs, my songs, download or not,
Yeah.
This is unthinkable, for example, someone in Southeast Asia is is that how you people live? You know what I mean? And I'm like, it's how we lived, because they grew up, they totally didn't do dial-up, and they went straight to running an entire business and being educated on their phones. This is just totally a different way of thinking. Now, I advocate for Japan to just not worry about that we miss software. The train is gone. It's past. However, if we think about AI, and this is really interesting about AI, and this is where also it's really beneficial for people to work on their own personal AI literacy, because when you understand that AI lives beyond your phone, AI lives beyond your computer, AI can live in your glasses, AI can live in the fabric of your clothes. It can tell you, how many washes this is going to last until it falls apart, how your glasses are going. It can live in the walls. It can tell you how safe or unsafe it is, can predict, earthquakes. There's so many places that AI can live. Now, if we're thinking about if AI moves beyond the screen, beyond a screen as we know it, right? And it can live in our physical world, where is a better society to build, to craft things, to make things, monozukuri culture, than Japan. Yeah. This is where Japan is absolutely poised to lead in the AI era.
Putting those two things together, this experience of which we talk about a lot, which is the craftsmanship, the capabilities of Japan that has a sort of strong history of building well-made things, and then combining that with the ability to use and leverage AI. I think
absolutely.
That's super
that is, in terms of the opportunity, for Japan, that is it. It is the physical world meets AI. So, AI, what we call physical AI, this is where Japan can really benefit. And I'm not just talking about the likes of larger organizations. I'm talking the entire spectrum. I'm talking someone, a small to medium business owner in Osaka to a family-owned business in Sapporo. I'm talking the entire country can benefit from this.
Yeah. And then do you see then from a workforce perspective, because I think what we know in Japan is that you have quite a lot of people in sort of large organizations that really have, as you were talking about earlier, very task-oriented jobs. Some task even software could solve, but they've sort of said, no, we'll still have, we'll still do this the analog way. Do you see then a trend of the workforce sort of shifting based on kind of the physical AI? If Japan adopts this physical AI structure, do you see then people shifting back to kind of the more tactical physical jobs, and maybe you would have less people doing kind of these menial kind of do you think it will just change how Japan views work in some way, if that makes sense?
It's a great question. I think it's interesting because Japan has always fundamentally viewed work differently, just as a nation. I've lived many years in Germany, and efficiency being absolutely in terms of the value hierarchy, efficiency is like right up there.
Yeah.
But if you go to somewhere like Japan or many other places in the world, to be honest, even somewhere like Mexico, efficiency is not necessarily really high up. It's
Right.
like, no, we prefer to be together rather than to arrive first, right?
Right.
For example. And so I think it's interesting because Japan doesn't view work simply as do this thing and then finish it. It is
Yeah.
supposed to be, and if you think about even the Japanese corporate structure, Uniqlo being another really great example of this, is that Uniqlo is supposed to, and other companies exist to also serve society. It should not just be for
Exactly.
profits.
Yeah.
And so I think this is really interesting for Japan. Because there's an essential social infrastructure that says work is not just I come and then I go home. Work is my social health. Work is also my financial health. It's my mental health. Many things. So the AI, the presence of AI, and then also the physical AI, is going to fundamentally change how we redistribute work in Japan. A couple of reasons. One, we're going to look at, for example, very physical jobs. Physical jobs will then, the actual physical laborious tasks, we will start to see these change, right?
Yeah.
Where people will then become more of like a director of the technology. You will look at either robots or AI, and you will then become the director.
Which is great for Japan's aging demographic as well.
Yeah, spot on. So if you're looking at two issues that we have, which is an aging demographic and a declining population, I mean, these are two things that, certainly can not necessarily just be fully solved, but, we can certainly make an indent with physical AI technology. But one thing that it's going to require for the Japanese society as a whole is to develop a skill of critical thinking and questioning. Now, this is something that has been present for many years, right? So for example, I'll give you an example. So if we think about like the Toyota Lean ideation box, this was there because Toyota said, every single person here in this factory can think. You have an idea. When you have an idea, I want you to bring it to me and put it in this box, right?
Yeah.
Which means you don't have to ask for permission. You're not like, oh, I have to do this because I was told it. The box says every single person here has agency, and every single person here has the ability to think and come up with an idea. That's what the culture says. This diluted over time. This is diluted over time, both on a corporate level, but it's also diluted in education. That you do it because you're told to do it. You don't really ask why. If you give someone a list, they can work through the list. But if you were to ask them to create the list themselves, they kind of freeze, right?
Yeah.
And so this is something where I am also passionate about the Japanese, not only just education system, but also like corporate culture, to go back to those original kind of more people that had like a bigger vision for the future, and they trusted their people more. Now, the interesting thing, particularly when it comes around to AI and AI pilot programs that I see, is that there's real leadership and then there's fake leadership. So I'm going to tell you the fake one. The fake one looks like this. Hey, Brian. Hi, Josh. We've got this thing. We're going to do this AI pilot, and you guys are in charge. Ja ganbatte, right? And literally that's the instruction you get. Ja ganbatte, and when you've done it, come back and like with your PowerPoint and then tell us how it went.
Yeah.
And then in that meeting, as you're going through what your results are, I can tell you that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And how can you do that when we didn't really set any metrics? And how can you tell me if I'm wrong or right if we didn't set, and you're keeping on moving the goalposts, right?
Yeah.
This is fake leadership. And this is what we're seeing a little bit. And I'm wondering if it's because there's an element of like a lack of literacy. I'm also wondering if there's an element of lack of curiosity around leadership. But we see the best results when it's leader-led learning. So a leader themselves is saying, here is my clear goal where we want to go. I don't know how we're going to get there, but Josh and Brian, I'm going to install in you any resources that you need. This is the team, these are your metrics, and this is the timeline, and this is how we're going to check in over the course of that project, right? And so when it comes to seeing successful AI pilot projects, especially in Japan, there's this element of like, it's the opposite of like micromanagement, right? Micromanagement is terrible, but this kind of management is also terribly unhelpful to somebody. So we need to have, when it comes to implementing new technology or new ways of working for the labor force, it's just as important that you also set them up for success as well. Because if you don't, it just becomes like a fake project.
Yeah, I mean, part of that sorry, did you have a question?
One thing I just want to ask is like, how prescient is this concern amongst the government? Like, we've kind of talked about how there is this opportunity, but like, are people recognizing that there's this opportunity? Or like, I know that you do work with the government, and so I'm kind of curious to hear like, how realistic is it to see these changes that we're like?
Because they were like
asking
the first. I mean, that's what I was actually going to say. Is like it's really interesting. To your point about leadership, like there is this kind of like, oh, I should be talking about AI because everyone else is, and my clients are asking me about it and whatever. But what I thought was really interesting from the government perspective is I remember it was like the same week there was an article about the EU having a emergency meeting to determine how they needed to quickly regulate AI because of the dangers and fear. And in that same week, there was an article about Japan sort of opening one of the largest open AI offices and immediately saying this is going to be injected into our government processes. And so I thought that was really interesting, that dichotomy where the market that you would expect to kind of be, yes, this is great, let's do it. And they're like, hold on, let's stop the brakes for a second. Could this be something? And Japan's like, yes, let's go. How did that was so interesting to me, given like that they missed the software era, and then with AI, they're like, let's go, let's do it today.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things how that like can happen. I think the first thing, because they, kind of miss software, and we've got two massive issues, which is declining population and also declining birth rate, and also an unclear national policy around immigration, right? So we're not quite sure what we're going to do with it. So we're kind of not doing anything right at the moment. Yeah. So because of that, and there's this element of Japan has waited kind of the software era being 30 years. So they waited 30 years to kind of see what are we going to do. And then now those 30 years are basically up. So there's this element of, okay, we have to do something now. Now, interestingly, one of the reasons why Japan Inc. has been able to move a little bit quicker than like Europe, and I spent 10 years in Germany, so I also have a little bit of context to how Europeans think. But Japan, they have like a distributed responsibility model. So in Germany, it's like, this is what we say at the government, and then everyone kind of has to do it. Japan is like, your Sony, for example, or Toyota or Nissan is kind of operating almost as like their own little cities, right? If we think about it. And Japan government trusts them to do it because they've earned their trust over time. So it's interesting, which is one of the reasons why if Japan as a government says, okay, this is generally where we want to go, companies tend to then like also fall in line, and then you get a system where it just moves a little bit quicker, for example, than you would say in Europe, where you kind of have to, pass, and pay $200, what it like in like kind of the monopoly type thing. You can kind of like, run. So I think that's really interesting. But I don't think we can underestimate. And back to your question, which I also want to touch on, is one thing that I've been deeply impressed about through our relationship with Microsoft as the official training providers for the Elevate program. So Elevate means elevating society with AI skills. It's not like how to learn Copilot. It's how to think about AI as a skill. Now, if we think about how important this is, the same way that like 10 years ago when people were doing dances on TikTok or whatever, and people going, that's stupid. And then there are other people now that are earning millions of dollars, right? Or even if you think about even going back even to e-commerce, there were certainly people that were like, oh, you wouldn't put their products online because like, oh, but maybe people are going to steal them or something like that, right? I remember like one of the biggest problems with Google ads were like, yeah, but your customers are going to go and start clicking on the links, right? But these were like all real issues. Whereas we've seen if you can master the technology as a tool, which AI is, the more that you can then obviously elevate your entire society. So I've been deeply impressed about how enthusiastic the policymakers and government officials have been around AI. Interestingly, you also see a geographical distribution. So you'll see in areas, for example, in Tokyo, they're like, AI, sounds like a good idea, and we're looking into like how we can, leverage it. But then you'll see somewhere that's like a little bit more rural, and they're like, we need to implement AI because we don't have any more people that are coming through our like shinyushain process, like in our new, hiring process. So you'll see.
Well, you saw that also in government offices, where they were like, there's not enough people to work in the government offices to keep like the city running.
Exactly, but this is really interesting, and also certainly a time of opportunity. And also, it's also, if we think about like a workforce, this is also then an opportunity for you to think, okay, that doesn't mean that all of the power distribution is then in Tokyo. You actually might get a better job and more opportunity, more responsibility, more exposure in another city where they're moving faster with AI simply because they have to. So it's a really interesting time, but but the common thread or the common pattern is those who understand the tool for their own context, right? For their own context, for their own needs and their own problems, and then can create, not only consume with that technology, because we've seen there are content creators and we know that they can earn money with that. And then there are content consumers. And then where's their money going? Out, new shoes, new bag, new whatever, right? And we've got to help people, especially at a time where salaries in Japan are not competitive. The only people that you really get here in Japan are like people who desperately want to be here, right? And like, you can't, how long is that going to work, right? How long is that going to work? Especially like with, immigration policy being like a little bit gray, they're not very welcoming at the moment. So it's like, well, the people that come are the people that are like desperately in love with Japan. This has got an expiry date. I don't know when, but it's got an expiry date. So that means we have to provide more competitive salaries. We have to provide a better competitive working environment, and being able to then use AI as a tool and creating the kind of environment in which that can happen. I think this is certainly one of those ways.
So there's actually kind of two sides about the career thing as well, because a lot of the Japanese companies themselves are also now saying that, like you're talking about the immigration being gray, a lot of the companies themselves are now saying like, oh, we actually want high levels of Japanese language ability. Like we're a recruitment agency, we see this a lot. And so like that for their engineers, whereas before maybe 10 years ago, 7 to 15 years ago, it was like, we don't care as long as this person can code and build what we want them to build. Yep. But I do think now with AI and that literacy increasing, they're more likely to say like, well, actually, like we can get Japanese people to do this. And so that is still tough. Like that workforce, that we're talking about how we need that workforce to be here and be able to build and sustain. But it's interesting to see from like both sides, there's kind of that restriction, that squeeze that's like coming.
Right? Yeah. I mean, companies have a question. So I'm going to like talk about baseball, which is like nuts because I know nothing about baseball. But the last World Series, I was deeply impressed that a Japanese player, Yamamoto, won MVP.
Yeah.
He gets up, wherever it was held, I even forgot.
LA.
I mean, you can fight in the comments, wherever it was, right? And he gets up and he starts speaking, "Arigatou gozaimashita," da da da, all in Japanese. Then he hands the mic over to his translator, and the guy's, "Yeah, Yamamoto-san, so excited, thank you so much," and blah blah blah. And I was like, well, look at that. What does that tell you? That means the Dodgers had a choice to make. They said, what's going to be cheaper and faster for us? We find someone with Yamamoto's ability that speaks English, or we take Yamamoto today and we hire him a full-time translator.
Yeah.
The Dodgers made a very clear business decision, which was we are going to make a bet, and the bet is it's cheaper and faster for us to take him now with a translator.
Yeah.
Now, this is then interesting because I'm like, Japan, it can work both ways, Like if a zero English speaking player can win MVP for the LA Dodgers, the LA Dodgers, right? I'm getting myself into trouble. Then why can this not be true the other way around?
Yeah.
Think Japan, it might be cheaper in the long run, bring you more value, not only just cheaper, it might bring you more value to hire someone with Japanese ability, but with a translator, or leverage tools now, for example. Or why does every single meeting have to be in line? Why can't we do it, for example, via email? And then, I mean, the person, whoever you're hiring, I'm pretty sure can, pump out a Japanese email and then just use Translate,
I think
right?
I think it's interesting as someone who is, I must admit, worked in Japan for 8 years, and Japanese is still not to the level that I could, not to the level. But I it's something I've said for a really long time when people ask me about wanting to come to Japan and work in Japan, and it's like, but I always say to them, what value are you bringing to Japan, right? Like, so if you don't speak Japanese, because I think if you speak Japanese, that's a completely different conversation that you can have, right? Because you can be trained, etc. But if you don't speak Japanese, I think you really have to have a good case as to why you want to be here. I mean, my situation was different because I was sent here via my company, but I think to your point about the skill set, I think, and I've always felt this even in my own hiring process. I've hired people who don't speak Japanese, because the idea for me is like, if the skill set is strong enough that you can immediately show value to the bottom line of the company, it doesn't really make sense to not hire you because you don't speak Japanese. I think there's a process to that. But to your point, it's like, what is the give and take, looking at the whole thing, not just do you speak Japanese, do you not speak Japanese, but looking at it from an efficiency standpoint, looking at it what's going to be the best sort of productivity standpoint. I find also, in my experience, that a lot of the non-Japanese speakers that I see coming in now are like in more management positions, because I think what you see a lot of domestic companies are wanting kind of a more Western style feel to the company. They want a bit more diversity. They want a bit more of like, and that's been quite interesting as well. So I think it also depends on kind of the position and the structure that you're in that. But I wanted to ask, speaking of kind of employment and position and things like that. So obviously there's a lot of positives around what the embracing of AI can be for Japan. Are there any kind of like guardrails that you think need to be put up, or are there anything you sort of seeing that is saying, you know, maybe this is something we should also keep an eye on just in case, or is there like those sorts of elements?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to any kind of technology, you know, Japan is the country of balance, right? Which I think is really interesting, like just how, like the Japanese mentality around everything having to be in balance, which means the higher that this technology rises, what's then the opposing force? Yeah. What does the universe need in order for, you know, to achieve that, in order to achieve that kind of balance? And it's really the human side, right? And so the human sides of things are things like the same way that it took us 80 years after the commercialization of the car to implement seatbelts. We're going to have to do something very similar with AI. Now, this is really important because if we think about this technology being available to users, and we expect the user to have the burden of all of the security concerns, it's simply too much. It's simply too much. The same way that you don't get an option whether or not you can choose a seatbelt or not in your car. Even your Ferrari comes with a seatbelt, right? You have to wear a seatbelt. It's built into the car. I'm hoping, or we advocate for, that the same thing should happen with AI security. Security on a personal level has to be built into AI systems. This is deeply concerning that this is not the case when we have, you know, for example, essentially every single person in the world has access to this kind of technology and doesn't have necessarily the literacy around how to use it. So I would love to see that built into a fundamental structural design level of AI systems, rather than like security be like a little bit of sprinkles on the top, right? I'd love to see that in a fundamental design level. We've done this with cars. 80 years is far too long. If we don't implement anything around AI safety for 80 years, we're going to be in trouble.
Who would drive that like kind of discussion? Like, is that a governmental level discussion, or is that
depends where you are in the world conversation?
Is that like a consumer level discussion?
You
know, a lot of the seatbelt thing was driven by consumer in some ways. Yeah.
So the final kind of like say on that is depends where you are in the world kind of conversation. But I'll give you a few kind of schools of thought. One is governments. Governments have to implement the same way that we have rules around what you can and can't do. It has to be the same thing. You know, for example, with AI. Other people say, where's the responsibility of some of these, AI companies, and for example, actively avoiding security or any kind of guardrails in their technologies. To give you an example, there are some, but this is also like also a level when it comes to a consumer, that you can also make your voice heard, and you can also vote with your feet, which is which program or which models are you using. So for example, if OpenAI comes out and says something like, we actively are, we know millions of people use ChatGPT as a therapist, but we are not only actively not caring about that, but we're going completely in the other direction, and if you use it as your therapist, well, that's up to you type thing. If you hear that, well, that's then up to you to move. You can go to another company if you like. So I think that's really important. But when it comes to AI safety, we can obviously have government support. We obviously can have agreement at an enterprise level. But your best source of security, still your best source of security, is you.
Yeah, because I think this is really interesting. The more sort of pessimistic side of me. I remember watching those like hilarious, this is US related, but those hilarious like Senate meetings with all of the big tech companies. Facebook and then TikTok and all of that, and you're like, how are you going to regulate this? And you
Don't even
can
use it.
barely know. And so I think this is a bit of the concern that I have, which is if the governments are going to regulate it, and let's say specifically Japan, we know Japan as a government structure is obviously a lot older. I always think of that like famous story where the like digital chief didn't know how to use a USB key. I was like, this is genius. So that I think is what I'm a little more pessimistic about, is the ability for governments to regulate, because if you think about, for example, GDPR, right, which was at the time, much overdue. I think people were like, wait a minute, there's data going on all these places, and finally the EU came in and said GDPR, and then it was like, okay, well, we have it, but we won't implement it for a year from now, et cetera, et cetera. And then Japan sort of followed with API, which is like basically GDPR for Japan. So I'm wondering, do you think that it will be a similar process where, let's say the EU, because they tend to lead in that, but maybe the US, that someone else sort of takes that sort of leadership, and then sort of Japan follows the way that kind of Australia has said, like, they're doing this big model now for no social media for under 16. What is it, 16.
16s,
So do you think it's going to be that, or do you think Japan needs to develop its own kind of guardrails?
So that's really interesting. I think there's a couple of like elements we can kind of break down there. I think element number one is that we need to look at is like, what does AI sovereignty look like, right? Or does AI sovereignty look like? But then how do we still collaborate in a global world, right? And so at DTJ, we're launching this month our 2026 signals report, which is where technology is going. One of our biggest signals is the fragmented world, which means, so there's a lot around data security. So for example, or data security and also like just AI in general. There's this idea that there's an AI race. If you to think about it, if there's a race, there are two players. One is the US and the other is China. This is said to be so deeply important that it can essentially change the course of humanity.
Right.
So if it's, for example, if the US were to win, or if China were to win, we would have a fundamentally different future, which is kind of like crazy when you're someone like me, which is neither Chinese nor American. And I'm like, what? That's my options. But anyway, if we think about this like on a business operational level, even on a labor level, workforce, the models that you are using in Japan may not be accepted, for example, in the US. I'll give you like an example of today. So for example, Malaysia as a country has adopted DeepSeek, which is a Chinese which is a Chinese model in their country. They haven't adopted an American one, they adopted a Chinese one. If you have employees in Malaysia and they're using, for example, DeepSeek with your company data, and you're sitting in San Francisco, how is that all going to work, right? So what we are dealing with now is that there was this kind of idea, there was this like a period of a couple of decades where we had this like, you can, Josh, you are the absolute like poster child of this. Wake up in Paris, fly back to Tokyo. You know what I mean? Like there was no kind of ideas of like borders.
Yeah.
When we think about data now, we're going to have to think about data more on a national level than we ever have before, simply because there are now issues around data security and also national sovereignty that are at play. But if you're like, holy shit, what does that mean? I'm just trying to work my job. This is, with being aware of this is really important, but what this is going to mean to you fundamentally is you're going to have a very clear strategy, like in your company or for you as a person. Who are you collaborating with? How are you collaborating with them? Say, for example, when maybe you're having some like remote co-working sessions, maybe that person is sitting in China, and through the kind of like shared research or something comes out, right? So I think you're going to have to be much more aware of where and how data is flowing, and the same way that there's kind of GDPR.
Right.
I think we'll see that kind of like kind of dislocation in a way, also at a geographical level for companies too.
So data is like one of the concerns, and what are some of the other fears? This might be a really basic question, but like, what are some of the other fears that maybe we should all be aware of, and then are they valid? Are they? Sure.
So people are going, holy shit, what am I going to do with my life? Like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Right? So I want you to think like, if we were all to explain to our ancestors, like not like grandparents, I'm talking like ancestors. Yeah. My job is to sit in front of a computer.
Oh, my parents still don't know what my job is. It's fine.
And then like type away. And I get money for that. They'd be like, are you kidding? And you're like, no, it's how I really make money, right? It's crazy. And then I have to get on a plane, and then I have to, drink a sparkling before I fly off, and then
Take a
I'm
nap, wake up ready for my meeting.
Yeah, and then get ready for my meeting, and I have to make sure that I can lay flat so I'm fresh when I get up. Like, this is all stuff they would laugh. Like, you're kidding. This is not real. What you're saying.
Yeah.
So to kind of, how does that confirm, or how does that compare? I think if we think kind of like decades from now, it'll be something similar. We will still always be doing things. Humans are fundamentally creators, but I think what we are doing will be very different. The same way that, there's very simple things. So, for example, like taxi drivers, people are like, are you sure you would get into a cab with a self-driving cab? I'm like, have you gone to a cab with an 80-year-old Japanese man who doesn't use Google Maps, has no real-time traffic data, and is just like winging it, like how to get there? That's scary to me now, right?
Yeah.
So I think humans will fundamentally always find a way. We always do. But because of almost getting back to like the original question, which is like the essence of AI is, if anything is possible, what you do, why you do it, who you do it for is going to be ever so important. So I think humans, what I really advocate for is to have a higher agency over your life. What do you want to do? How do you want to spend your time? Who do you want to be remembered for? What kind of company do you want to build? What kind of legacy do you want to have? Instead of just like, got to get the spreadsheet out. I think this kind of busy work will be over, which some people will feel uncomfortable with because they have spent their lives doing busy work. So how do you then help them find new value? So I think this is then obviously a question that's really quite big for people. But I mean, has there ever been a time in humanity that we haven't had to like existentially review where we are?
I mean, I think there's two things. I think, and we've had this conversation separately, which is like, one of the things that I found very interesting about the AI creativity conversation was that you started to see, which kind of started when, Hollywood went on strike.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, these poor actors, oh my God, you don't have the ability to act in a movie and make millions of dollars. This.
Wow.
And then that sort of trickled over into, when people started using more of Midjourney, and then Sora debuted, and everyone was like, oh my God, this is like the end of the industry. And what was interesting is you kind of saw some people were kind of like asympathetic and was like, well, what you do is like not a real job, right? Like, there was this pushback a little bit of like, I work in a factory and you make movies, and like, why should I feel bad for you because the automation took my job ages ago? Yeah. And so I think what's going to be really interesting is like how AI is going to start to sort of redefine the value of work, and also it's really allowed us to see what people think is valuable from a work perspective. Like, there was very little sympathy, I think, when there was that sort of creative aspect of the business where people were like, yeah, but I mean, that's fine. Like, you were a graphic designer now and AI can do it. Sorry, find another job. I think it's going to be interesting as AI sort of starts to inject itself into other aspects of work. Yeah. I think we're really going to start having a conversation around what work do we feel is valuable and what work we don't feel is valuable. And there might be new things that open up that we go, oh, this is now a quite valuable work space than it was before. Because I found that so interesting how like so many of my friends, I would like mention the strike and they're like, ugh, actors, like whatever. That's not even like a real job. Like that should be your hobby and then you have like an actual job. So that's one piece that I think is interesting. The other piece that the thing that keeps me up at night is like, is there going to be, should we sort of reevaluate that everyone will have a job? Yep. Right? Like, it just might be that we need to also think about the fact that there just might not be enough jobs for 8 billion people on the planet if AI comes in. And that could be a good or a bad thing, depending on, to your point, how we sort of prepare and how we think about AI as this form of electricity. So those are kind of the two thoughts that I have.
So if we kind of like break them down. So the first thought being like, I want to kind of break it down as AI is a multiplier. Yeah. Like, what does that mean? It means that the person that is being replaced by whatever it is, AI, in their graphic design job, they could also say, thank goodness, right? And then their job is to then manage and set direction. Yeah. So what we've seen is that AI has very poor direction, right? So AI is a multiplier. So, for example, let's say that I have no skill. I have no skill and I use AI, right? So it's 0 multiplied by AI. That's 0. Let's say I have 0 skill and I multiply it by 1,000,000, right? We're still at 0.
Yeah.
If I have a skill, whether it's graphic design, whether it's screenwriting, I'm a math teacher, whatever, it could be anything. If you have a fundamental skill, you can accelerate that skill, right? And so that I think is really important. I think the idea of will a job look like a job, like you go at 9 and you leave at 5 and it's 5 days a week and all these things, I think that's certainly on the table for redesign or revision. But I think in terms of will every single person have something to do in the world, I think the answer is yes, which is why it's ever so important that AI is your accelerator, it's your multiplier, it's your vehicle.
Yeah.
I get deeply worried when people go, oh my God, ChatGPT is my best friend. I'm like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
It ain't your best friend.
Right.
And so if you think about like a mobility perspective, it's not like you're driving and ChatGPT's in the passenger seat. That's a bad idea. You're driving and ChatGPT is your vehicle getting to where you want to go faster, right? Yeah. So that's how you think about it. If you feel like I couldn't, function without my AI, I would really question that. That would be a concerning flag to me. But I want you to think about AI as your multiplier, which means you can pick even a very obscure thing. Let's say that you are the world's expert in like 90 sitcoms or something. You know what I mean? Like can be like literally anything.
Yeah.
And you become then that expert that can like really take off like we've never seen before. We saw that in the creator economy, right?
Yeah.
The people did like this one thing, whether it was like, very peculiar kind of like left of center type things. And they have entire YouTube channels and brand deals and like it's a total thing, right? So that I think can happen again, like with the AI economy. But you have to be responsible for having some kind of fundamental skill, right? So that has to happen regardless. And then you can use AI to multiply.
To just sort of enhance and multiply your capability. And just speed, I think that's how I kind of use mine, is it just makes me faster.
Yeah, so you could walk, for example, when we got here, I got a taxi. Josh, how did you get here?
A taxi.
You got a taxi? We could have walked. We could have.
We could have.
Right? But we chose a taxi because it got us here faster.
Yeah.
That is how I want you to think about AI. We're not like deeply thankful to the taxi for bringing us here. And that's what AI is going to be. It's going to be fundamental infrastructure for us that it's obvious that I'm going to get a cab, unless it was like a nice day and I had time and I felt like it.
Yeah.
Like it's the same thing with AI. There are going to be moments where you are going to actively choose not to use AI because you want to have the exercise.
Yes.
The same way that there are some times that I'm like, oh, it's a nice day, I'm going to go for a walk. The same way I could get a cab, but I'm choosing to get the exercise, right?
Yeah.
But I know I can get there faster if I need to. But I know I can get there slower if I want to as well. Yeah. So I think this is going to be really important, but we're going to fundamentally see job titles change. So for example, I don't think the term CTO is going to be around for much longer.
Or Chief Digital Officer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the big problem that we have like with digital, like DX, particularly here in Japan, is that it was a busho, it was like a department. This is a really bad idea because what you want to do when it comes to anything digital or innovation is that you want to have it across the organization.
Yeah.
So the last thing as an organization you want to do right now is to create like an AI department, right?
It's already done.
What you want to do, what you want to do is you don't want AI to be a vertical.
Yeah.
You want AI to be a horizontal across your organization because each person is going to need to use AI to solve their problems. The other option is that you go in as the AI officer and solve everyone's problems.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Which is
right?
Not what you want
Have people solve their own problems, but with an element of literacy, right? Obviously that you've been able to instill in them. So don't think about AI as a vertical, think about it as horizontal throughout your organization. And like you'll see much more movement and obviously then much more adoption. Because especially in Japan, like if you kind of put your flag in the ground as like an expert, people go, じゃあ聞いてみて。あの人はすごいよ。あの人すごいよ。You're going to ask that person because like they're the expert.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that with AI in Japan. What you want to do is you want to say AI is for everybody in their own way, but give them the tools and the skills to be able to navigate.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, what is your problem? And then how can AI solve it versus like, we need to use it in every situation or that person is the expert. And so refer to him and how to use it.
I think this is super interesting, but I know we're running out of time and I wanted to ask one thing to people who are listening. How in all of the chaotic conversation, how does one create, I think there's two questions. I have two components of questions. So the first one, I'll tell a quick story first, is I was watching this video about brain drain using ChatGPT, et cetera, et cetera. And what they found that was very interesting is they were like, if you just type a prompt in ChatGPT, like fix this, rewrite this, cut this down, that yes, there is a bit of brain drain there. But if you use ChatGPT as if you were speaking to another employee, so I wouldn't just say, Brian, fix this email. I would say, fix this email because I need this and this and this to be said. So this is one of the things that I ask is sort of how do people use AI in a way that they're not removing themselves from the critical thinking capability work. I think that's question one. Part two of that, and maybe that question comes first, which is where does AI literacy begin? So if you want to be that person in your organization, not to say that I'm the AI expert, but if you want to prepare, you're starting to see emails come through the internal emails. We have an AI division now. We're launching AI products. We're about driving efficiency, productivity. What should that person be doing initially to start to prepare for those conversations that are going to happen probably across their organization? First question. And then second question, how do you engage with AI in a way that isn't removing your own ability to have critical thinking, to have sort of thoughts about how you want to use the AI and drive it and not let AI sort of drive you, similar to your car analogy.
Yeah, I mean, those are two great points, and I think almost like one and the same. If you are thinking about how can I use AI effectively, right? How can I use it really effectively? I want you to think that working like with an AI is almost an intellectual exercise. Like if you are not using any brain power at all, you're probably not doing it well, right? The same way that if you go to the gym and you're like lifting a few weights and you don't break a sweat or anything, it's like, did you really do it properly? It's a bit like that, right? So it means that fundamentally you're going to have to get really good at something that AI really can't do, which is then mapping that context. So it's things like, and I think that how you explained it is like spot on in terms of how can I make sure I'm making the most of this tool, right? How can I make sure I'm making the most of the tool? Imagine that I'm going to go to someone downstairs who I've never met before, or next door, wherever you are, and tell them, make this report. And that's all the information you've given them. You haven't given them any files. You haven't given them why I want to do it. You haven't given them any context. They'll produce you something, but it's not necessarily good. One other fundamental thing is that we have to remember that an LLM, or for example, if you're functioning like with any kind of like ChatGPT or Claude, it's fundamentally a mathematical model, which means it gives you something based on the predictability or on like what they think could be a good idea. So that doesn't mean it has to be correct. That means that I mathematically predict that even if this has even if my prediction is 10%, it's still more than none, so I'm going to give it to you, right? So your job is to not necessarily tell AI, what to do. I think there is an element of letting AI do what it's really good at, which is like finding patterns and connections that we've never been able to, that's not obvious to the human eye. But your job is to have the vision of what do you want to do? Why do you want to do this? So for example, you need this report. Why do you need this report? I need this report because I want to stand out, or like I need this report because I want to get promoted, or I need this report because my client is absolutely gonna, like, we're on the chopping board next to this other agency if we don't want to. So you've got to understand that the more context that you can build around guiding your tools, the better, right? So I think this is really key. But in terms of if you are a professional in your 30s and 40s, and so we still have an element of like working. I think if you're kind of like 60 and you're like on your way out,
I'm not doing this.
I mean, honestly, there are people that I've literally heard being like, thank God I'm retiring. I don't have to. I've heard that. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, do you.
Fair point.
Yeah, you do you, whatever, right? Which is also totally fine. But if you still are planning on working in the next 5 years' time, I think the number one thing that you can invest in is your own AI literacy. Now, AI literacy, but you've got to think, why do I want AI literacy? Do you wake up in the morning being like, I want to be AI literate? No. You wake up in the morning and you go, holy shit, in the meeting today, they're going to ask me, shall I have these servers on premises or not? Shall we go to the cloud or not? And if you're like, I don't know how to answer that, that's scary. So what you want is confidence. You want confidence. And for me, confidence is literacy plus experimentation, right? So it can't just be, and this is a thing where we struggle in Japan, it's like literacy, like I want to get confidence. So let me study. I'm like, have you downloaded anything on your phone? Not yet, I'm still studying. I'm like, no, come on, you got to use it, right?
Yeah.
Or the other side, in like the West, it's like, I haven't read any manuals, but I'm like,
I'm just gonna try it.
I'll just try it, right? So like neither's really great, right? So what you want to do is you want to have a really nice balance between AI confidence comes from literacy and experimentation. So invest fundamentally in your own AI literacy. As a business leader, I think basically what you need to know around AI, like to be AI fluent, is you need to be able to identify what's an opportunity for AI. You need to then, so which is like the why, is this worth our time? Is this a good question to work? You need to essentially have a fundamental idea about the AI architecture. That means what kind of AI could I use, right? So that means like you need to know that AI exists beyond an LLM, which is like, can you answer this question? You need to know that AI can process, AI can sense, AI can do all these different things.
Yeah.
So that'll be the next thing. And the last thing, for example, like as a leader that you need to know, so you've gone from, can I identify a problem? Can I basically follow someone telling me what this should look like? Because if you can't, a vendor will tell you, you need to do this, 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 and this. And you're like, oh my God, that seems like really difficult.
Yeah.
But remember, consulting firms, they're going, they're really struggling right now.
Yeah.
So they're looking for some cash. So they want to sell you stuff. So in order for you to be like a good, educated buyer, you need to know what's the minimum AI and kind of AI that you can get away with in order to like make this problem, to solve this problem. The last thing that also you really need confidence around is like, how can I scale this throughout an organization? Because AI in my phone versus, from my entire sales team is a totally different thing, right? So I think as a leader, that's what I would be focusing on. How can I identify a problem? How, do I have the literacy around to like solve it? And then do I have enough literacy around like what it would look like? What are the issues around scaling?
Yeah.
Now this is genuine technical fluency, right? And so I think it's very possible, the same way that, if you can teach someone, open a browser and like type in this and then click here. I mean, people can do that, right?
Yeah.
So it means that we have learned it before we can do it again.
We've all taught our parents how to use
Yes,
an iPhone,
exactly. Exactly. So I think as someone like going into the workforce and making sure that you're still relevant, I would still really make sure that the understanding that AI is like, it's not your best friend. It's not, chilling out and like having a coffee and like having a good time. AI is really a vehicle getting you somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that GPS analogy is like, if you type in anywhere for your destination, you go nowhere. Right? So you need to have a very clear idea about where you want to go. Now, this is then interesting because then we do need bigger vision. So my entire kind of like thesis around AI is people are not excited around like, oh, this tool can basically write you, really polite emails and it can like fix your English. This is not a compelling vision of the future.
Right.
If you can tell someone the same way that we think about electricity, that you can like power machines that can keep babies alive that were born prematurely, or you can help people stay in contact with their families on the other side of the world. This is when people start to see like, oh my goodness, that this can actually fundamentally be an infrastructure for our society, and they stop thinking about AI being like, oh, it's an efficiency tool. And I think because, if we think about who's leading, especially like in the Western world, who's leading the conversation around AI, it's like the American way of life, right?
Yeah.
And Americans are like, like, where's the money? Like, and efficiency, right? And so if we think about this is then how we've been selling AI, rather than we can solve cancer, we can find ways that people don't have to sell their businesses to multi-million-dollar conglomerates, that you can keep your family business going. There's so many different use cases, but it's going to be up to you to find out what's your problem that's worth solving. And so this is where like my what I appeal to people is to think about what's the problem you personally want to solve, right? And then go for it.
Yeah.
And then whatever your skill is, AI can then multiply that. But if you have nothing, no matter how much AI you use, you're getting nowhere, right?
Yeah.
So we've got to find that what's the compelling view of the future, what's the problem that we want to solve, and what's the number one skill that you personally are going to develop that you can then accelerate with AI in order to contribute to that really compelling future. Because as you said, we're new with AI, there's a lot to be done, and so you need to get like involved in order to like build that new world. Because the same way that like consumers said, Why don't we have seatbelts? Are you kidding me? This is crazy. We need a safer way to get around with these cars, but I still see the value in having a car, but there has to be a safer way.
Yeah.
We as consumers also have to, speak up and say something.
This has been great. Thank you
And
so
it
much. It was
amazing.
super
Yeah.
interesting.
It was great.
It was
Thank
really,
you.
I love having, I think we had a really good conversation about AI that wasn't all like,
Yeah.
sometimes it can get really fluffy. So I like that this was very like grounded and practical. And we'll say like, people can ask questions in the comments because we talked about a lot for sure. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was great. It was a real
Yeah, this was
pleasure.
awesome.
Thank you
you.
so
Thanks so much
much.
for having us.